Hello, I'm Anthony. Welcome to this essential guide to MIDI in Cubase. Over the next couple of episodes, we're going to have a look at MIDI Remote. And this is a process by which we can define surfaces, software interfaces basically to our hardware. So here you can see a partly configured digital representation of the Native Instruments machine, which is sat just to my left. I'm going to configure one of the buttons in this today, and I'm also going to configure the same function in my Native Instruments Complete keyboard and show you different interactions between those different pieces of hardware and some of the issues that you might encounter when you're configuring your hardware. Now obviously you're going to run into slightly different issues to me. It's going to depend entirely on what piece of kit you're using, but hopefully I can give you some general guidelines that'll help you when you're configuring your surfaces. If you're enjoying this series and you want to help support me, check out the Patreon and YouTube channel member links below. Awesome way to do that. Okay then, let's get on with it. Here's the task for today. I want to configure the solo button, and I'm going to do it on both of these devices and show you all the various different ways that we can do that. But the first thing that we need to do is get our surfaces prepared. If we head into Studio, if you don't have this lower window open and you head into Studio MIDI Remote Manager, it's going to bring up this box where you can define your surfaces and you can see the Add Surface button. You can also see that I've already defined two surfaces. This part of the process is very simple. You literally click Add Surface. It's going to basically pop you up into this box which contains exactly the same functionality. You'll select your vendor, Native Instruments, select the piece of kit that you're interested in connecting to. Click Add Model to build a brand new surface for another piece of kit. And then you'll select your input and output MIDI ports. We've already discussed MIDI ports previously. Basically, you can see the options that I've got available to me here. I've already configured the Complete Control and Machine Mark III to connect to my various pieces of kit. So I'm basically going to abandon this process, but that would just create a third surface if I carried on. Now, it's not totally intuitive how to actually get out of this page if you want to cancel it, but you can basically click anything. I'm going to press the Go to MIDI Controls overview, and it's going to ask me if I want to throw this stuff away, and I can say yes. It would be nice if there was an abandon or cancel button there, but never mind, it's not the end of the world. Now here's part of my Native Instruments Complete keyboard. As you can see, I've not created a surface for the entirety of this keyboard because some of the buttons aren't currently mapped. If at some point in the future I decide to map those buttons, absolutely no problem. I could extend the surface. All of these buttons that you see in the surface are represented by physical hardware buttons, but there are actually two pages. There are basically like toggle buttons that I can switch between page 1 and page 2. Everything that you see here are all the page 1 options. Well, I'm going to create a single page 2 button in the lower right hand corner so that if I press button number 8, that's what I'm going to tie to my solo command. In order to do that, I'm going to need to go to the second edit page. So we've already seen the MIDI Remote Manager. That's where we create the surfaces, the very highest level configuration options that allow us to create one of these things. Now we're going to edit this surface, and the easiest way to do it is to simply click on the little pencil button. It says Edit MIDI Controller Surface. I'm going to click that. Okay, so we're now in Edit View. I can now start adding knobs and faders and buttons to this surface. And I'm going to add a button underneath this knob here. Wherever this red focus zone is, that's where the button's going to get created. So I can choose my various options down the left hand side. I'm going to select button. I'm going to press the button on the device. And then as you can see, it's just created a button. Well, I don't actually want it there, so I'll throw that away. And now I'll select not only the area that I want the button to appear on, but also its size. And there's my button. Just as a matter of interest, I could just as easily have created all 8 buttons by pressing each of them in turn, and you can see that it basically cycles left to right and creates buttons of the same size as the one that you've just created. I'm only going to worry about this button number 8 today. That's the one we're concentrating on, and I want to map the solo function in Cubase to it. Can you see that when I've clicked each of those buttons, have a look at the CC number over on the right hand side. Cubase has correctly identified. I've currently got buttons numbers 1 to 7 mapped to channel 16 because I don't use them, so I've thrown them out the way. Whereas button number 8 is mapped to channel 1 because for the demonstration purposes of today's video, I've manually configured that button on my keyboard to output a channel 1 message CC119. Let's have a look at the other side of the fence as far as this keyboard's concerned. This is the controller software by which I configure the device itself. So this is where I tell the keyboard to output a CC119 message on MIDI channel 1. If I press this little MIDI button, then you can see here's all of my buttons set up, and if I click button number 8, page number 2, there it is, CC119, and that's outputting on channel 1, but all of the other buttons, as you can see, are outputting on channel 16. So Cubase has read that information, it's seen what that button's doing, and it's automatically configured an equivalent in the surface. We'll come back to that configuration software shortly. We'll need the configuration software a fair bit today. So for the time being, we're done editing the controller surface. I've created the button I wanted, and I've mapped it to my hardware, and as you can see, it's reading the correct information in terms of MIDI channel and CC value. Let's come out of that edit screen. Now we're going to go into the third of the edit screens. It's accessed from this little icon. It says Open Mapping Assistant, just to the right of the mapping page drop down. Now I'm going to press that. And this is where we decide what that function's going to do. Now I want to map that button to the solo function in Cubase, but that's not quite as easy as it might seem. If I type the word solo, you can see that we've got selected track solo. That sounds pretty good. But if I scroll down a little way, under key commands, there's also an edit solo function here. So which one are we supposed to use? Well, spoiler alert, selected track solo is going to work much better than your key commands function. I'll just make this mapping screen a bit bigger so that we can see a bit more information. See these two symbols in this column in the mappings table? We've got, this is called mapping type. We've got parameter mapping and key command mapping. A key command is a really dumb response mechanism. It's basically waiting for a keystroke. It would be S. If you were using the keyboard, you would press the key S. That's a key command activating solo, and it will work. But the other feature, selected track solo, is a parameter mapping, and this is a much more tightly constrained concept. I like to think of this in the same way that I think of automation. You can have automation lanes in Cubase, which is this really tight kind of integrated mechanism where there's a two-way conversation occurring between the hardware and Cubase. Or you can have MIDI CC information, which is a little bit like posting a letter through a letterbox. It's a much more disconnected communication mechanism, and that's the same with key commands. They will work, they will activate the function that you're asking them to do, but they don't really know what they're doing. It's just the letter S on your keyboard after all. There's no kind of intelligence behind the scenes. So generally speaking, wherever possible, if you've got a function that isn't a key command, choose that. So let's do that. Let's click the selected track solo function. And as you can see, it pops up in the right hand side of this window over here. Now we want to tell it where that command's coming from. Well, it's this button that I just created here. If I single click it, then you see the little blue button appear and it's highlighted in the configuration window below. That's all we need. If I now click apply mapping, watch this screen below, the mapping screen. So we've just created a new mapping. And you can see now the button has an S in it because it's now going to perform the solo command. This is this two-way interaction that I'm talking about. Cubase understands a lot about this function, so it can basically display some pretty information for you in the interface. And down below we can see that it's a parameter mapping and it's set to solo selected track. Now if you want to demo these features, you have to shut the mapping assistant down, because if I press that button, the mapping assistant is kind of going to intercept the command and do unwanted things. So let's just shut the mapping assistant down for the moment, and Cubase is now basically live. So I'm going to press the button on my keyboard and we'll see what happens. Looks like it's worked, doesn't it? I pressed the button and the solo came on. Here's the problem though. I'm going to press it again. So I'm now spamming button number 8. Doesn't matter how many times I press it, it's never going to work again. It basically worked once and that was it. So something's broken there. Let's try and figure out why that hasn't worked. I'll disengage the solo manually and we'll head back into the mapping assistant. Well, the problem is that the command coming out of the keyboard is of the wrong type. It's a trigger command. And this is where the keyboard kind of fails, because what we ideally want to be able to send is a gate command, and this keyboard can't output gate commands. Okay, so I've just thrown a few new terms at you. Let's just pause for a moment and have a chat about what's going on here. I'm going to delete this configuration. throw it away, get rid of all of that mapping, close the window down. I'm just going to bring my MIDI monitor into the equation, and I'm going to press this button. So every time I press button number 8, that's what gets output. Value 127 on channel 1 with the correct CC value. That's because the keyboard is outputting a trigger command. That's what a trigger command is. It's literally just whatever this value is specified in the text box. So the keyboard is outputting exactly this. As things are currently configured, and I'm going to show you numerous options today, we're just dealing with one of them. Cubase needs to receive a value 127 followed by a value 0. It needs to receive basically a message pair, and it's only receiving one of those commands. So triggers are no good, they will not work for this configuration. That doesn't mean, however, that we can't perform this operation with the keyboard. We can. We just need to do it via a different mechanism. We're going to use a toggle command instead. Before we go any further, let's have a look at the MIDI monitor and see what a toggle command does. So I just pressed the button once and we got a 0. There's the 127. There's the 0, there's the 127. So now every time I press the button, it toggles those two states. Now that's okay, we're getting close to the end result, but we're not actually there yet. Let's take that out of the way. Try configuring this function again and see if it works yet. So I'll select my button, search for solo, choose it. I could double click, by the way, and it will automatically assign it, but I like to keep everything manual so that you know exactly what's going on. Click the apply button again, shut the window down. Let's see if this works. Kind of partially working. Sometimes it's doing what I want it to, and sometimes it isn't. The reason for this failure is both systems, both Cubase on one side of the fence and my S49 on the other side of the fence, are trying to control the state of the toggle command. We need to tell one of those two systems to stop it. Well, we can. Head back into the mapping assistant, select your function, and now instead of the value mode, you see in this box down at the bottom, mapping configuration, instead of it being set to toggle, let's set it to jump. This says, sends a new value to the Cubase function as soon as you move the control. This can result in abrupt value changes. Let's just have a look at the toggle text. It says, allows you to toggle the state of the mapped function. If the hardware control, let's just kind of take that part of the sentence, are in toggle mode, use the jump mode instead. So the help function, the help text, is telling you your keyboard is set to toggle mode. Don't set Cubase to toggle mode as well. You can't have them both in toggle mode. They basically just conflict with each other and end up kind of falling over, which is why it's kind of random as to how many keys you've got to press in order to make it work. So now Cubase has relinquished control of the toggle function. The keyboard is taking care of it. Let's close the mapping window down. And now every time I press the button, solo goes on and off. Furthermore, at the moment the function's off, the light on my keyboard is off. Press the button, now the solo button's on and the light on my keyboard is on. So we have perfect integration here. And here's the problem with the MIDI remote manager. It does work, it can be made to work exactly as you want it to, but finding the combination of commands between your hardware and Cubase to actually get it up and running, it might be tricky. You're just basically going to have to figure this stuff out. Once you've done it for a single command, you can extend that functionality everywhere. That's why I'm focusing on a single function, a single command today, because it's going to fill your toolbox with everything you need in order to be able to do this for yourself. Okay, piece of hardware number 2. We're going to switch over to the machine. You can see it's a partially configured surface. I actually stopped at this point when I was configuring the solo button because I thought this was a great demonstration tool for me. So this highlighted button down here physically says the word solo on my machine. So I'm going to map that button to the solo feature in Cubase. Let's have a look at my management interface for the machine. Here it is. Here's the button. You can see it's generating a CC89 message. And you can see that we're setting off with the same function. So I'm going to keep it in trigger mode for the moment, just to prove that this part of the process is going to be identical to the keyboard. Open my mapping assistant, choose the button that I'm interested in, search for solo, map it to the button, and as you can see it's defaulted to toggle, and we already know that this is going to fail. The trigger command is not going to do the job. Let's switch the function to toggle mode instead. There are a couple of bugs in the MIDI Remote Manager, and I'm discovering that if you reconfigure already existing mappings, it goes wrong more often than if you create them from a completely standing start. So I'm just going to throw that away and do it again. Select my button, select my function, map them. We're still in toggle mode here, so this isn't going to work. Sure enough, I have to click the button. You can probably hear through the microphone how many times I'm having to click it to activate it. That's no good to anyone. Let's put it in jump mode instead. And now the machine is responding perfectly. Solo light is off, solo's off, solo light's on, solo is on. And this is where the two paths diverge, because the machine is also capable of generating gate messages. So we're going to generate a gate message instead and see what this does. I want to show you this in MIDI Remote Manager, but while this mapping is live, it's going to get in the way. Basically, the MIDI Remote Manager is going to intercept the message that I want to see, so I'm going to throw the mapping away. I want to show it you in the MIDI monitor, and I want you to see what a gate message looks like. There's me pressing the button down, there's me releasing the button. Cubase demands both of those commands in order for this function to work. Select the button, select the function, map them together, and this time the hardware is no longer managing the toggle mode, so we can leave it to Cubase. Leave Cubase in toggle mode. If you've got a toggle command like the solo function, one of the two devices has to be storing the toggle information. It has to basically remember whether the thing's on or off. We're going to let Cubase do it. And so now I press the button, light comes on, function comes on, press the button, light goes off, function goes off. It works perfectly. So this is a perfect demonstration of the fact that one of those two devices is operating in toggle mode. The machine itself, the hardware, is sending the correct message, sending a gate message containing both of those essential pieces of information, the 127 and the 0. Just anecdotally, the reason why way back when I was trying to configure the trigger with the keyboard, I pressed it once and it worked, and then it never worked again, basically because it was only ever sending 127s. Cubase never received that vital 0 to tell it that that was basically like the end of the message. So here we've got gates working properly now. Okay, so far so good, but we're not done with the story yet, because you might remember me saying there are multiple different ways to issue the solo command. We don't have to do it through a parameter command, we can do it through a key command. So let's try that. I'm going to select my solo button, search for solo again, but this time instead of choosing select track, I'm going to scroll down into the key commands and I'm going to select solo down here instead. Here's our little keyboard symbol, and it's now a key command mapping. Can you also see the difference of the mapping configuration below? There's a lot less information to play with. We don't have that configuration option available to us, and this is a red flag to the fact that something's going to go amiss here. It's kind of going to work, but it's not properly going to work. I'm going to close Mapping Assistant down, press the button, and again, and again, and again, and again. Looks perfect, doesn't it? Well, the issue is that the solo button on my machine is never turning on. Doesn't matter how many times I press that button, I'm not actually able to get that two-way communication between Cubase and the machine. That's the problem. If you use key commands, you don't have that level of interaction between the two systems. So wherever possible, just getting us back to the function that I actually want. Use parameter commands if you possibly can. Just a quick note about this light coming on your system thing. If you want to see that functionality, the command has to come from Cubase to the hardware. Cubase is telling the hardware to turn its light on and off, and that's why in the machine controller editor we have LED on for MIDI in. If I press the button, each time I press the button, the light's coming on and turning off. If I had this set for MIDI out, the light never comes on, because the hardware is communicating with Cubase, but it's never receiving that vital instruction back to turn its LED on. So I understand all of this is very specific to the piece of hardware that you're mapping, but the more information that I can give you, the closer you're going to be to finding your own answers. Okay, that was pretty intense, so we'll leave it there. In the second half of this little mini-series for MIDI Remote, we'll have a look at some of the other functions, including variable controls with knobs. We've got absolute and relative commands to worry about, and I'll also show you some of the features to do with quick controls that are idiosyncratic to MIDI Remote. Hope you enjoyed this one. Please hit like if you did. I'll see you for the next one. Thanks a lot.